All right, so in this video, what we're going to do is take a look at the Explosion FX Deformer. We'll talk about what's good about it, what's bad about it, what's different about it compared to some of the other similar deformers like Shatter and the Explosion Deformer, and we'll see how we can use it. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so this is kind of what we're going to be kind of recreating. Nothing too complex as usual, but we're going to see how this works, how it's different, how it's similar to our other kind of explosion related deformers. So I'm going to just start with a new scene here. I'm going to create a platonic like I did previously, and also create an Explosion FX deformer. And what we want to do with this is make it a child of whatever we want it to work on. You could also group this in a null and it would work on multiple objects if they were also inside there. And in some ways, this is similar, like I said. Other ways, it's different. You know, right away, we're already seeing that it has gravity and it has thickness to it, which is something that is a bit new, though really almost a combination of the Shatter and Explosion deformers. So first off here, we have our time. And this is really kind of the main property we would animate here. And it's represented by this green, almost field-like sphere in our perspective view. And we can also use that to control this. Okay, much like our other explosion-related deformers, it is based on the number of polygons in your object. So you're going to want to add more. Now, unlike the Shatter and the Explosion, this does try to come up with some interesting segments, and we'll see more about that here shortly. So you don't have to go in and kind of slice this up like I did previously, but it can help a little bit because even this is still perhaps not as kind of natural or realistic as you might expect, and especially not as realistic as, say, a Voronoi fracture. So slicing this up can help. And if I did want to do that, what I would do is hit C to make this editable, or use the make editable icon, go into one of my sub-object modes, and you can see how many edges and polygons we already have. I probably should lower this just a touch before making it editable, and then come in and you say something like line cut, make sure visible only is checked off, and then come through here and just start slicing this up. This should help a little bit. Once again, kind of check from a few different angles, just, you know, slice and dice here, something like that. Try and go against the direction a lot of those lines are going, even though I didn't do a very good job of that in a few places. But yeah, something like this, I think, is going to give us just something a little bit more natural, realistic, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so we have that. Once again, time is still our main property here. But now we also have a cluster tab. So if we go to the cluster tab here, this is where we can fine tune these individual pieces, starting with thickness. So we can get thickness with this. You don't have to put it in a cloth surface like we did with the Shatter or the Explosion deformer. It's built in here. You can also add variation, and you'll see variation in a lot of different places with this deformer. And generally speaking, you know, we want to have some of that variation. What I would also say as we're going through and adjusting a lot of these properties is also kind of make sure to reset the time to 0% and see if it's changing your shape at all. It wouldn't surprise me if you adjust the thickness here, if you start to see any kind of weird bulging or things like that. Now I'm going negative thickness, which isn't really what we'd want, but that's kind of what I'm keeping an eye out for here. So just keep that in mind. So that's looking pretty good. Back in cluster, you can adjust the density, which is, you know, kind of the mass or how fast these are going to move. So a higher density will move slower than a lower density. And once again, we can add variation. So go and crank that up to, say, 50%. You can adjust the cluster type here. So whether you want to do it by individual polygons or automatically, which is the default where they just kind of separate it. You can even use different selection tags if you wanted to have this only work on part of an object. And that can be really useful if you wanted to use fields, because you could use the fields to help make your selection. So what I could do with this is, let's see, go into polygon mode here, select some polygons. Okay, store that. selection, and we could use fields here to control it a little bit easier if I really wanted to, but I think this will be good for right now. But then what you do is you take your selection tag, drag it in here. Now it's only working on that part. Now keep in mind, at least as it stands right now, I don't know if there's a way to fix this. It's treating this as a single object. So that's going to be a bit problematic because we can't kind of shatter that whole thing, which ideally would be nice. But if you just wanted to create kind of an interesting shape where something's been broken, that could be really useful. And then, do a current state to object and delete the bottom section, and you almost have kind of a geode type piece of geometry there. Let's get rid of this. Make sure that is deleted out of the cluster here. Oh, I'm sure we just unchecked fix selected. Let's actually undo that. I forgot about that. Oh no, that's not what I wanted at all. Fix selected. Oh, we don't have our polygon tag, so let's try that again. So if we uncheck fix selected, interesting. So it's treating it as two different pieces here. That's right. So I thought that was going to do something very different, but it did not. So we also can do selections and polygons. And that allows you to create a larger chunk. So you could save out a few different selections of polygons to create very specific chunks if you did think that would be useful. And I could definitely see perhaps some reasons for that. So back in cluster now, we've gone through all of those. I'll set that back to automatic. And with this automatic, you can specify the size using that minimum and maximum number of polygons here. So if you only want the min to be smaller pieces, you can turn that down. You could turn this higher as well to get a little bit more randomness. And if you wanted all smaller pieces or all larger, put those values closer together. But the default values actually do give us a pretty good amount of variation there. And I can just right click on an arrow to go back. If you want these to disappear, well, you can do that as well. So much like in the Explosion Deformer or the Shatter, those kind of scale down pieces over time, this does not. Okay, so this works kind of best when things go off screen or outside the camera's view. If you want to try and keep things realistic. If you do want things to disappear, though, you can do that either by time or by distance. So you can say starting at 10 centimeters, and over the course of the next 10 centimeters, it will start to fade or scale down to 0. And we can kind of see that. All right. And you could do distance as well. So there we go. Next up, we have the explosion section. We still have a couple of other of those kind of sphere fields to talk about. We'll get to those here shortly. Strength, all right, for the overall blast. So, once again, kind of controlling how far, how fast these are going to go. You can control the decay, which is how fast that strength kind of goes away and gravity starts to overcome it. Things will start falling quicker instead of going out further and then falling down. And once again, variation. So a little bit there, probably not a bad thing. Too much decay, though, I'm not sure I really like the way that looks. Back in Explosion, you can adjust the direction here, whether you want it to go in one specific way or as is the default, all directions. And once again, a variation here. All right, that can be nice because things tend to go a little bit more kind of scattered with that turned on. The blast time, all right, is another kind of property you can animate. It's similar to just the overall time, but allows you to kind of control that. And it also relates to our normal time property. So you can see if that's at 8, then, things are still going to work a bit. So it almost slows things down a little bit so that if you wanted something just to maybe fracture instead of just explode, you could adjust the blast time there. And then get something like that, still have gravity applied to it. Blast speed, all right, how fast, decay, variation, same with range. Range is another one of our spheres. And what's interesting about this range is that it allows you to kind of fine tune what parts of your object are actually being exploded. So if you turn down this range small enough, you will see, and I think I might have screwed this up. So let's just reset to another Explosion FX here. Though I guess I really could have just done that. But the blast range here allows you to control what parts are going to be a part of the explosion. And it's a little bit tricky with our platonic, but what you'll see now is that only certain pieces are shattering and we're left with kind of that bigger chunk. Okay, so that can be useful if you don't want this. Now, what would be nice is if you could move the blast range into separately, okay, of the other ones. And unfortunately, you cannot. But that allows you to kind of control what parts of your object are part of the explosion. And once again, variation there. I don't know how much I would use that if you were actually doing this. So I'm going to reset this back to default like I should have previously. And center this, since that will help with that. Next up, we have gravity. So, once again, if you want gravity, great, leave it as is or make adjustments. If you want 0 gravity, you could set that to 0. Okay. And then as we do this, things just kind of go out. So slightly different, but very similar now to our explosion deformer, especially if we also turned on disappear and used the time. So can see over 10 centimeters, it's going to disappear, or distance, like I was talking about earlier. And then we have our range here to affect what parts are going to be affected by gravity. So similar to the blast range, any parts inside there should not be affected by gravity. All right, though I'm not 100% certain we are seeing that now. So let's maybe make that a little bit smaller, see what we get. So yeah, that's kind of strange how I'm not seeing that like I would expect. Everything else I think is about the same. So let's just try resetting that once again. Okay, well, yeah, I don't think that's going to make much of a difference since nothing else really changed. That's what that should be doing. I'm not sure why it isn't in this particular case, but that's what that should do. Next up, we have rotation. By default, these pieces are not going to rotate. They're just going to, kind of face their same direction and fall. In rotation, we can adjust the speed. So the higher the speed, the faster things will rotate. Decay, how fast that rotation speed kind of diminishes and goes away, and then variation for that as well. You can choose where you want it to rotate from, whether it's the center of gravity, which really should just be kind of the center of the object, or if you prefer a particular axis, and once again, variation for that as well. And just to kind of see what that rotation does, you can see now how that's starting to look, a little bit more natural / realistic with these pieces rotating. Keep in mind though that because I reset this, by the time I get to a value of 27%, 30%, things are pretty much gone. And that's where in the explosion, adjusting the blast, time, blast speed, as well as the strength, all of those can kind of help to give you a little bit more control of that explosion and not have it be over so quickly, right? Because before I even get to 50% time, the explosion's essentially off screen. And so it's going to happen a lot faster than I want. But if we go too slow, then it's going to look a bit strange as well. Lastly, we have special. So let me add just a little bit of time here so we can kind of see these effects. So we have wind. So if you want these to move in a specific direction, as if there's wind, you can do that once again with variation. And twist. So if you want things to kind of twist as well, you can have some of that. And both of those do influence the way your animation looks when you adjust the time. All right, so it's not just about adjusting those properties, but also make sure to kind of scrub through or work with the time as you make adjustments to those to see how that looks and make sure it's what you want. Because honestly, the twist, even the wind, don't really think I use that all that often. But that is essentially it for the Explosion Deformer. So a little bit better than the Explosion Deformer and the Shatter. In some ways, a combination of the two with the addition of thickness. However, we still can't add dynamics to it. We can't have it interact with other objects in our scene. And that's kind of where it still falls a little short. But for something quick, for something easy, something that we're not going to get very close to, this is definitely a nice way to create a bunch of animation and a nice explosion effect. So that will do it for this video. If there's anything else you would like to see, please let me know. And until next time, take care.